Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys.
Welcome back to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges with Amanda Hill. Amanda is a California family law attorney known for her strategic and compassionate guidance through complex custody cases. I'm Heidi Mack, and today's episode covers a growing trend in the courts, conjoint therapy, a type of court-ordered counseling that can have a major impact on custody outcomes. As mental health becomes a bigger part of family court, it's critical to understand how therapy is used, when it is required, and what to expect. This is Conjoint Therapy, What Judges Are Ordering in Today's Custody Battles. Thank you so much for Amanda. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let us get to it. What is conjoint therapy, and how does it differ from individual therapy?
Yeah, so conjoint therapy in the eyes of the court system and also the mental health world is a type of therapy where one parent and a child go to therapy together. And it's a very lengthy process normally. And it's normally ordered when a child or children have a strained relationship, right, with one of the parents. And it's normally in a divorce matter or a paternity action where there's custody issues involved. And they, for whatever reason, there's a strained relationship there. Oftentimes you'll see it right around the age about maybe 8 to older. Very common to see it in teenagers, young teenagers, middle schoolers, right, where they're already kind of dealing with a lot in and of itself, just growth wise, being a teenager, hormones, things like that. But in addition, now they're navigating their parents getting divorced and they're having a strained relationship with one of the parents. So the courts are going to say, either the parties agree or the courts say, we need you guys to go to therapy together. Now, what it looks like is they usually meet with the therapist, and then the therapist talks directly to the child first. Tries to have a few sessions first of, okay, what's the underlying issue here? Why are you having a strained relationship, or why are you not happy with the other parent? Or sometimes refusing to see the other parent despite the court orders. And sometimes that can take a couple weeks, and then there's a breakthrough. Sometimes that takes months, really depending on the length and severity of the issues involved. Then the therapist that's selected will do some meetings with the parent to get to what's going on the parent's side, to get their perspective. Sometimes they'll talk to the other parent, the custodial parent in that situation, and see from their perspective what's going on. And then also sometimes they'll review court orders and see, okay, what is the history of this case? Has this been a nasty long battle, or what's going on here to get to why they're now sitting in my couch, right? But if it's successful, it can be a major, major shift for a relationship between a child and a parent. And the courts know that. Now, one thing to consider is it's very expensive, right? A lot of times it's not covered by insurance. But if somebody is really incentivized to do it, they'll do it, and the court will order how those costs are allocated. Sometimes it's equally between the parties. Sometimes it's with only the parent seeking the counseling, with the child paying for the sole cost of it. Now, comparatively, individual counseling is when either just a parent or just a child is going to counseling, and they're solely dealing with their issues amongst themselves with the therapist one-on-one. So, both types of therapy are ordered depending on the facts and circumstance of a custody case. But conjoint therapy, I have seen an uptick in the courts making those orders.
Wow. So with those, orders, when do judges order conjoint therapy in these custody disputes?
So it's going to be kind of how I explained earlier, when there's a strained relationship. Now, one parent usually has to make that request. So it's a motion that they file and say, hey, I'm having these issues with my child. And so I would like to be a court order that the other parent is going to cooperate and make sure that my child goes to these therapy sessions, and we can select somebody and move forward in starting these sessions. If the other parent says, no, I'm not going to agree, or no, I'm not going to pay, then the judge will make a decision on that issue. that they have to cooperate with the process and how the allocation of costs are going to be made. Sometimes there's going to be allegations, right, when there's a strained parent relationship, that the other parent has caused this strain, has caused this issue,
Hmm.
has caused this alienation, and said, you're putting things in their head. That's why I have this strained relationship with my child. And in those circumstances, sometimes the courts, if the courts is picking up that maybe there is something behind that allegation, they may make an order that says, okay, I'm going to order that this happen and order that, you know, so and so, John Smith pays for the full cost, but I'm going to say it's subject to reallocation. So come to find out, I get a letter from the therapist that, yeah, dad or mom is putting bad mouthing the other parent, then I may consider reallocation of those costs because I want to get down to the bottom of what is going on. Why is this child, for example, refusing to go see the other parent?
Yeah. So then what, in your experience, what are the most common reasons that you see that they need this type of the conjoint therapy?
It's usually going to be teenagers who are refusing to go see another parent. I will say I've seen it a couple times. For example, a teenage daughter who unfortunately is too embridled in the unraveling of their parents' relationship, and maybe there's some
Mhm.
infidelity there,
Yeah.
and maybe unfortunately that teenage daughter knows what happened, and maybe now they don't want to go see their dad because they hate their dad. They're not happy with their dad, how they treated their mom, and they feel betrayed,
Yeah.
and they are refusing to go see the dad. Right, that's an example that I've seen a few times.
Yeah.
And it's up to the dad to say, obviously, try to have those conversations. If that doesn't work, get the professionals involved and ask for this conjoint therapy to take place. And that's probably the most common one I've seen. I've also seen allegations of parental alienation that I've just mentioned,
Mhm.
where one parent, is just completely bad mouthed and has been alienated from the child, I should say. Another common situation is when maybe one parent has been out of the picture for a really long time, right? For
Yeah.
whatever the reason is. Maybe they had to go to rehab, maybe they were in jail for a really long time, or maybe they just had to get their life together and they've been out of the picture, but now they want to come back in the picture. The judge is not going to say, sure, 50-50, go ahead, go right ahead, just re-enter that child's life. The court's going to say, well, you got to put in your work first. This is going to be too traumatic for this child. So instead, I'm going to order that you do so many sessions, and sometimes there's detailed as you need to do 8 sessions of conjoint therapy. And then I'm going to get a report from the therapist and decide whether you're going to have additional visitation or time with your child, right? Because there needs to be a transition for the child, because all the court really cares about is what's best for the child and the less trauma and impact on the stability of the child's life.
And you did say this earlier about a parent that maybe saying one of the parents might have refused. So I'm assuming they can refuse to participate in the court ordered therapy, but like, can they not per se?
The child or the parents?
The parent, you were saying a parent can refuse. Are
Well, they
Can
can
they
do whatever
refuse?
they want, but whether it's against a court order, then potentially they have to be that issue needs to be brought back to the court, right? So if
Mhm.
if it's been court ordered and they're still not complying with the court order, then you can bring an issue to the court that says, hey, they're not complying with the court order. They're supposed to be
Okay.
cooperating with this process. Maybe they're not showing up and taking the kid to the therapy sessions, right?
Mhm.
Then you can go in what's called ex parte and tell the court, hey, they're not listening to you. They're ignoring your court orders. Best thing to do is speak to a judge's ego, right? You tell the judge, they're not listening to you, right? They're not going to be too happy with you. So sometimes that will result in sanctions. That will result, which is just a legalese to say they're going to make you pay you a fine. You're going to need to pay a fine, and the way the fine works is it's whatever the cost is for that parent to have to go in and say, "Hey, judge, he's not listening to you. You need to pay. You need to get him to listen to you, and so he needs to pay my fees for having to file this motion, right?" So, for example, I've had a case where we had to go in ex parte like 6 times in 1 year, and it was on this very issue on conjoint therapy. And finally, after several slaps on the wrist, the judge said, "Okay, enough is enough, sir. You're just not listening to me. I'm going to sanction you. So, you know, the hope is that you don't have to go through that because that's a pretty costly and sad experience and very dramatic. But it does happen, and sometimes it's needed.
So when they do have to do this, then who chooses the therapist? How are they vetted?
Yeah. So normally the standard is whoever is paying would usually do their research and provide three names with the credentials, their resume, to make sure that they are truly, professionals in the field, has experience working with children, because it is a very niche area. Not all therapists can do conjoint therapy, and they may not even be experienced or licensed to do it. So they need to make sure that they are the appropriate therapists to provide the conjoint therapy. And then they give those names of the three individual therapists to the other side. And then the other side will usually have a deadline, a time limit of to do their own due diligence and provide a selection from those three.
Interesting. And then because you said the selection from 3, the judge does not go in there on that at all? It's just the 2
No,
parents?
no,
Mm,
unless there's a discrepancy. So let's say they
mm,
still can't agree and nobody's following the court orders, then sometimes on a very rare occasion, somebody will file a motion and argue, "Hey, I'm paying for it. They won't make their selection or whatever it may be. I want you to make it an order that this individual therapist be the therapist in the case." Very rare situation. The
okay.
best practice to do there is um, to make sure that you're putting in parameters and requesting that the judge make the order so specific that, for example, and I've had to do this before, if this person doesn't select a name within 7 days, then the other parent gets to select and it's moving forward and that's the person they're going to be using.
Yep, makes sense. So then once they are in this therapy, how does the therapy progress get reported back to the court?
So sometimes because of HIPAA, right, they have to be careful of, sensitive information getting put into public records. So sometimes it's as simple as, you know, I would like an update from the therapist, just summarizing how the therapy is going. It's not going to be all the nitty ditty, all the details, so to
Yeah.
speak, right, of
Mhm.
what the child is saying, what the parent is saying, for example. But it may be a summary of, okay, how is this going? Can you give me a progress report, so to speak? So sometimes what you'll see with conjoint therapy is it'll be ordered, and then the judge will say, okay, see you back here in 6 months. I want to see how progress is going with therapy.
Got it, got it. So you were saying this a little bit earlier. With the does the conjoint therapy is it ever used to repair estranged parent-child relationships?
Yeah, exactly. As I mentioned earlier, that's probably the most common situation where it's used. In fact, I would say probably 60 to 70% of the time, right?
Mhm.
Or even more. There's always going to be different reasons for why the relationship is strained, but that's really the triggering event that causes the courts to make an order of conjoint therapy.
Got it. So then what happens if this therapy fails or the parents stop participating?
Well, those are two different questions, right? So if the therapy is not working, normally I would say you got to give it at least a year, right? If
Mhm.
after a year, I will say this, I have had cases where a therapist will say, we'll write a letter to both sides, right? There's two attorneys, two parties, and write a letter and say, "Hey, I've been working with this child and they are dead set. They do not want to see the other parent. And here's the reasons why. I'm going to make a recommendation that maybe this child continue to go to individual therapy, but maybe we put a pause on conjoint therapy until they work on their deeper issues in individual therapy." I have seen that. Unfortunately, there are situations too where one parent who is asking for the conjoint therapy and they get too frustrated, they get impatient, they think, you know what, I'm paying so much money for this therapy and it's now, for example, it's been 6 months and I just can't do this anymore, or I can't afford this anymore. I'm just
Mhm.
going to give up. Again, unfortunately, I have seen that. I have experienced that on a case.
Yeah.
And sometimes, though, I will say, sometimes maybe you try it once, take a break, that either the child's not ready yet or maybe the parent needs to go to their own individual therapy first and deal with their issues and why they are having the strained relationship, right? And how they maybe haven't dealt with the underlying issues of why they're getting a divorce, right? And maybe they need to do that first and then come back to it later. I will say the best time to do it is before the child ages out, because once they turn 18 and you can't force the child anymore. There's no jurisdiction that the court has over the child. So
Mhm.
it's interesting because I do get some pushback sometimes from clients, right? And they'll say, for example, well, you know what? They're going to find out when they're 18 and they're an adult. They'll just know, and I'll be able to tell them that their mother or their father is the one that kept me away from them. First, of course, I always say, well, I don't think that's a great parenting. But also, it may be too far gone. And at that point, they may have felt like they're abandoned. They may have felt like, well, my parent didn't care enough to fight for this relationship. And it may never be salvageable. But one thing I will say is I have seen cases completely turn a page through therapy. I've seen it work. I've seen it not work, of course, but I've seen it work. And I've seen a parent slowly work its way back into in-person visitation, right? Weekend visitation. It takes time, but it really requires patience too, for sure.
I mean, that's the goal. We all want, if you're going to have to pay for therapy and we have to go to therapy, we want it to work. So, I mean, obviously that's the goal. So, um, Amanda, what is your advice for clients navigating a custody case with court-ordered therapy then?
I mean, the biggest advice is to be patient about the process, to participate. Don't have a bad attitude about it. If you're being court ordered, comply with that court order. Keep good records, show proof that you're complying with it. And if it's conjoint therapy, trust the process. Have conversations with the therapist, do check ins, right? And know that it can work if you put the effort into it, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. And thanks for joining us on navigating consumer and family law challenges. If you're in the middle of a custody case and court ordered therapy is on the table, Amanda can help you understand your rights and responsibilities. Visit knhlawgroup.com to learn more. And don't forget to like, review, and subscribe. Thank you again so much for joining us. Your pleasure, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.